Do you remember the household items you bought in the 1970s if you were poor, when thrift shaped every corner of life? These items stretched small budgets, filled homes, and kept families going. Looking back, is it surprising how much those simple things still stay with us? Plastic butter tubs as food storage were as common in poor households of the 1970s as Tupperware is today. Every fridge was stacked high with yellow-lidded tubs, none of which actually held butter anymore. They became the universal container for leftovers, soups, or whatever scraps needed saving. A child might open the refrigerator expecting margarine, only to find beans, spaghetti, or stew waiting inside. The tubs were cheap, plentiful, and virtually indestructible, which made them perfect for families who needed every penny to stretch. Mothers rinsed them out carefully, stacked them in cupboards, and reused them endlessly. Even when the print on the lid wore away, the tub still had value, sometimes lasting for years before finally cracking. They were also taken to picnics and potlucks, filled with potato salad or coleslaw, and no one thought twice about it. If you showed up with a butter tub, everyone knew exactly what was inside: thrift, care, and a little bit of pride in making do. They may look cheap by today's standards, but back then, they were a quiet symbol of resourcefulness. Everyone had them, everyone used them, and nobody wasted money on buying extra storage when the butter tub was already sitting there for free. Glass peanut butter jars as drinking glasses were another household staple that poor families in the 1970s swore by. After the peanut butter was scraped clean, the jar was washed, dried, and placed right into the kitchen cabinet. Suddenly, it became a cup. Some were plain, others had designs printed on the glass, cartoon characters or promotional logos that made them even more appealing to kids. Families did not need to buy fancy drinkware when peanut butter brands practically provided it for free. A cold glass of milk tasted just as good in a jar as it did in anything store-bought, and water from the tap seemed to sparkle in thick glass that could survive endless drops. Kids fought over their favorites, claiming a certain jar as theirs and refusing to drink from another. Even visitors at the dinner table were handed a glass jar without apology, because that was just how things were. Over time, cupboards filled with mismatched jars, each one a reminder of how frugality kept families afloat. Today, people might chuckle at the idea, but in the 1970s, those jars were both practical and a little bit charming. Coffee cans as kitchen canisters were a sign that nothing went to waste. Once the last scoop of grounds was brewed, that metal can had a second life. Families rinsed them out and immediately put them to use holding flour, sugar, or rice. Some cans were decorated with labels taped to the side, others just had a scribble with a marker. The smell of coffee often lingered no matter how many times they were washed, so biscuits baked with flour from a coffee can sometimes carried a hint of the morning pot. They were sturdy, stackable, and could survive years of heavy use in a busy kitchen. Kids also discovered them outside the kitchen, filled with nails, screws, or crayons when parents needed cheap storage. A line of colorful coffee cans on a pantry shelf was both a symbol of poverty and a badge of ingenuity, proving nothing useful was ever discarded. Families saw them as too valuable to throw away, and they became one of the most common sights in working-class kitchens. Simple, strong, and endlessly reusable, coffee cans held more than food. They held the spirit of making do with what you had. Bread bags reused as lunch bags were as natural as tying your shoes. When the loaf was gone, the clear plastic bag was shaken out, folded, and tucked in a drawer for the next school day. Sandwiches were wrapped in wax paper and slipped inside, ready to be carried to class. Kids often grumbled that their bread bag lunch looked less fancy than store-bought brown bags, but their parents knew better. It was free and practical. The bags carried more than sandwiches, too. They held cookies, apple slices, and sometimes even crayons or marbles when a quick container was needed. Some families used them as gloves on cold days, slipping them over socks to keep shoes dry in the snow. Others tied them into knots for makeshift storage, proof that even the thinnest bit of plastic had value. For families on tight budgets, nothing went unused, and every bread bag had a second life before finally being tossed. Looking back, It was another quiet reminder of how thrift defined the rhythm of daily life. Mismatched hand-me-down dishes filled cupboards across the country. Very few poor families had a matching set, and no one cared. Plates came from grandmothers, cousins, or neighbors, each one a different color or pattern. A dinner table might hold one floral plate, one plain white, and one chipped saucer pressed into service because nothing else was available. Glasses were the same, no two alike, yet all functional. Meals were served on whatever surface could hold food, and somehow the mix made the table feel more homey, more real. Kids learned quickly which plate was theirs, even if it was cracked or faded, and they felt comfort when it appeared at mealtime. Visitors noticed, but it was understood that food mattered more than presentation. Families took pride in feeding everyone, not in impressing anyone, and mismatched dishes became part of the story of every meal. They spoke of survival, community, and the way love always mattered more than perfect table settings. Mayonnaise jars as flower vases were another little touch of 1970s frugality. Once emptied, the glass jars were rinsed and filled with water, then placed in the center of the dining table with a bouquet of wildflowers or daisies. To a child, it looked just as beautiful as a vase from the store. Parents saw no need to spend extra money on fancy containers when a jar did the job perfectly well. Sometimes kids peeled the labels off the jars, leaving sticky glue that never fully came off. Others decorated them with stickers or crayon marks, turning them into personal masterpieces. No matter how they looked, those jars always held pride of place on the table, proving beauty did not need a price tag. A handful of flowers from the yard, tucked into a mayonnaise jar, turned even the simplest supper into something special. Some jars were painted or wrapped in ribbons to dress them up for Sunday dinners or birthdays. Others were left plain, standing proudly as a reminder that beauty could be made from anything at hand. Guests smiled politely, but no one laughed, because almost everyone had seen a mayonnaise jar holding flowers in their lifetime. In homes where every penny mattered, jars became decoration, and practicality blended seamlessly with pride. Old towels cut into rags were a necessity in households where waste was unthinkable. When a towel grew too thin or frayed to dry hands, it was given new life. Scissors snipped them into squares, which were stacked in closets or tucked under sinks. Suddenly, they became the cleaning cloths for every mess imaginable. Grease on the stove, mud on the floor, or even a quick spill at the dinner table. All of it was wiped with a towel that had once dried countless hands. Sometimes the edges were hemmed roughly to make them last longer, and other times they unraveled until they were just strings. Kids were sent to fetch rags for chores, learning early that nothing was ever thrown out without another use. A pile of these rags under the sink was as essential as soap or sponges. Mothers taught children that nothing ever truly wore out. It just found a new purpose. Even the smallest scraps were used to polish shoes or shine windows, proof that resourcefulness ran in every stitch. These rags saved money on paper towels and kept homes running smoothly without extra cost. It was not glamorous, but it was dependable, and in the 1970s, that was more valuable than appearances. Plastic milk jugs as water pitchers were another example of poor families making do. When the jug was emptied, it was rinsed out and refilled with tap water, then placed in the fridge to chill. The wide spout made pouring easy, and the handle was already built in. Families did not see any reason to buy fancy pitchers when the jug worked just fine. Sometimes the edges yellowed from repeated use, but nobody cared as long as it held cold water. Kids often chewed on the plastic spout absent-mindedly, leaving it dented and rough. Guests never batted an eye. They expected to be served water or Kool-Aid straight from a milk jug. Some people even cut the tops off to turn them into scoops for pet food, birdseed, or flour. Kids carried them to ball games filled with homemade Kool-Aid, each jug sweating in the summer heat. The same plastic container that once delivered milk became a workhorse of daily life, proving that usefulness always beat out looks. Guests never expected a glass pitcher. They expected a milk jug, frosty and ready, because that was what everyone used. It was practical, humble, and unforgettable. Reused aluminum foil was as much a part of the kitchen as salt or sugar. After baking or covering a dish, the foil was carefully smoothed, folded, and set aside for the next use. It might be lined with faint grease spots or wrinkles, but that did not matter. Poor families knew foil was expensive, and wasting it was unthinkable. Some sheets were washed so many times they had holes patched with another layer of foil to make them last. Kids learned to flatten them out carefully with their palms, trying to make them look new. Drawers filled with wrinkled stacks became proof of just how far thrift could be stretched. Sheets were stored in drawers, flattened until they looked almost new, and used again to cover casseroles, wrap sandwiches, or line pans. Children were scolded if they threw it away, because every scrap had value. Guests at potlucks often recognized reused foil, smiling knowingly because their own kitchens had the same habit. It was another small act of thrift that kept households afloat, a reminder that every resource was stretched as far as it could possibly go. Today people laugh, but back then, saving foil was simply smart. Wire clotheslines in the backyard were the original dryers for poor families. Wooden clothespins held shirts, jeans, and sheets in the breeze, each one swaying under the sun. Electric dryers existed, but many families could not afford them or wanted to save on electricity. The clothesline became part of the rhythm of daily life. The smell of sun-dried sheets, stiff with fresh air, carried through bedrooms at night and felt richer than anything from a machine. Clothes flapped loudly in the wind, snapping like flags, and neighbors could read a family's laundry almost like a diary. Children loved running between the rows, ducking under damp sheets as if they were tents. On summer afternoons, the backyard became a maze of fabric, turning chores into play. Children ran between rows of laundry, playing tag among shirts that brushed their hair. And yes, every once in a while, a sudden rainstorm ruined the whole day's work, forcing families to start all over. Still, the clothesline was worth it. It was free, reliable, and woven into the fabric of home life in the 1970s, as ordinary as the roof over your head. Wooden television trays were a weekend ritual in poor households of the 1970s. They folded out on spindly legs, balanced just enough to hold a plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and peas in front of the family's only television. Dinner was transformed into an event, with everyone focused on the screen instead of the kitchen table. They creaked loudly when you leaned on them, and every child learned the art of eating carefully so the tray would not topple. Sometimes the screws poked out a little, scratching knees if you sat too close. Still, families kept them in rotation because they made the living room feel like a theater, even if the movie was just the nightly news. The trays always wobbled, threatening to spill gravy if someone shifted too quickly, and kids learned to sit perfectly still. Even when the varnish chipped or the screws loosened, families tightened them up and kept using them year after year. The sound of those trays clattering open in the living room was the signal that television time had officially begun. Poor families did not think of them as luxuries. They were practical, space-saving, and made every television dinner feel like an occasion. Looking back, they were flimsy and awkward, but at the time, wooden trays were part of the heartbeat of home life. Mason jars for everything were as ordinary as forks or spoons. They held canned peaches, green beans, and pickles stacked high in basement pantries. They became drinking glasses, leftover containers, or even piggy banks for loose change. For families on tight budgets, mason jars were the workhorses of the kitchen. They clinked together noisily when stacked, making cupboards sound like glass symphonies every time they were opened. Some were etched with company logos, reminding families of what once filled them long before they became water glasses. And because they were nearly indestructible, they outlived plenty of store-bought cups that broke at the first drop. Their clear glass showed everything proudly, from homemade jams to the iced tea poured on a hot summer afternoon. Kids often carried them outside as makeshift bug catchers, poking holes in the lid for air. A single box of jars could serve a family for decades, passed down from one generation to the next. Every cupboard rattled with their clinking, and every shelf seemed to sag under their weight. In the 1970s, poor families knew that mason jars were more than storage. They were survival. Old coffee percolators filled kitchens with sound and smell every morning. Sitting on stovetops, they sputtered, hissed, and gurgled as hot water cycled through the grounds again and again. The lid rattled with steam, and the aroma drifted through the house long before anyone poured a cup. They demanded patience because rushing only made the coffee too weak or too bitter. Families treated them like trusted companions, cleaned carefully but rarely replaced. The ritual was so ingrained that hearing the bubbling was almost as important as tasting the first sip. They were finicky, boiling over if you forgot to watch them, but no one minded because the ritual felt familiar and comforting. The glass knob on top showed coffee bubbling up like a science experiment, mesmerizing children who were told not to touch. Even when newer machines arrived, poor families clung to their percolators until they wore out completely. Coffee brewed this way was strong, bitter, and sometimes gritty, but it fueled entire households day after day. The sound of a percolator is long gone now, but for many, it was the heartbeat of every morning. Worn quilts made from scraps were treasures stitched together by hand. Bits of old shirts, faded dresses, and worn-out sheets were cut into squares and sewn into colorful patchwork blankets. They were heavy, imperfect, and sometimes scratchy, but they carried stories in every piece of fabric. No two quilts ever looked alike, and that uniqueness made them feel almost magical to children who bundled under them. They smelled faintly of cedar chests where they were stored, carrying a scent of both history and home. Families saw them as proof that nothing was wasted. Every scrap could be turned into comfort. Mothers and grandmothers saved every scrap, no matter how small, because they knew it could one day keep a child warm. Kids traced patterns on the quilt before falling asleep, recognizing a piece of Dad's old work shirt or Mom's apron. Every winter, those quilts came out in stacks, piled high on beds to fight the cold nights without running up the heating bill. They were not just blankets, they were history stitched by hand. To this day, some of those quilts survive, softer and thinner, but still holding the warmth of a family's past. Plastic pitchers from gas station giveaways were found in nearly every poor household. With each fill-up, you might walk away with a free pitcher plastered with a logo. Soon enough, families had cabinets full of mismatched plastic, all in odd colors and shapes. They poured Kool-Aid, iced tea, and water every day of the week. The lids rarely fit tightly, so spills were constant whenever someone poured too quickly. Over time, the logos faded, leaving ghostly outlines of oil companies or soda brands that once gave them away. Still, they held gallons of memories alongside gallons of cheap iced tea, becoming part of everyday meals. The handles often bent under the weight, and the lids never fit quite right, but they were too useful to toss away. Kids fought to pick their favorite color pitcher, even when they all looked equally cheap. At family gatherings, a half-dozen plastic pitchers lined the table, each one sweating condensation in the summer heat. Nobody cared that they were freebies, they worked. For poor families, they were as essential as silverware, and for years they kept homes running on thrift and resourcefulness. Repaired toasters with electrical tape were a safety hazard that nobody thought twice about. When a wire frayed or the cord cracked, fathers wrapped it tightly in black tape and declared it good as new. Families continued to pop bread in without hesitation, ignoring the occasional spark or burnt smell. Sometimes the tape itself melted a little, leaving a sticky residue on the counter that no one bothered to clean. If the toaster managed to last another year, the repair was celebrated as proof of Dad's ingenuity. Replacing appliances simply was not an option. You stretched what you had until it refused to work another day. Sometimes the toaster lever stuck, and someone had to jiggle it loose with a knife, a practice that would make anyone today shudder. Kids watched nervously, but trusted their parents' word that it was fine. If the toast came out golden instead of blackened, the repair was considered a success. Buying a new appliance was out of reach, so repairs kept kitchens alive. Looking back, it is a wonder more people did not get shocked, but at the time, fixing instead of replacing was simply how families survived. Hand-me-down furniture covered in sheets was the poor family's version of a makeover. Old couches with sagging cushions or threadbare armchairs were draped with bed sheets or blankets to hide the wear. Sometimes the patterns clashed horribly, but families called it cozy. The sheets rarely stayed in place. Kids slid off them, pets bunched them up, and someone was always tucking them back in. But the ritual of adjusting and smoothing them became second nature, part of living with furniture long past its prime. Every family had at least one chair that looked more like a wrapped present than a piece of seating. Sheets were tucked in tight, re-smoothed every morning, and adjusted every time someone sat down. Guests pretended not to notice, and kids grew up thinking a sheet-covered couch was completely normal. The makeshift slipcovers often smelled of laundry detergent, masking the decades of wear underneath. The furniture itself may have been old, but with sheets, it felt fresh enough to last a few more years. In the 1970s, a couch was not thrown out. It was dressed up and kept alive. Tin foil pie pans as dinner plates were a true mark of frugality. Lightweight and easily washed, they were pressed into service long after the pie was gone. Families stacked them high in cupboards, pulling them out for sandwiches, casseroles, or even cereal. They dented easily, making food slide to the center, but that only added to their charm. Kids tapped them like drums at the table, annoying their parents until the first bite of dinner shut them up. Even at family gatherings, it was not unusual to see everyone eating from a clattering collection of shiny pie pans. The ridges around the edge made food slip and slide, but no one minded. It was better than buying more dishes. Kids bent them into shapes or flattened them for crafts when meals were done. At picnics and potlucks, pie pans clattered together, proof that everyone was making do with what they had. They may not have been elegant, but they kept food on the table without costing a cent. In homes where money was scarce, even aluminum pans were given second, third, and fourth lives. Plastic ice cube trays were in every freezer, and almost everyone was cracked. Families twisted and smacked them against counters, trying to pry out frozen cubes. More often than not, cubes shot across the kitchen floor or broke into jagged chunks. Water often spilled over when filling them, freezing into sheets of ice that glued the trays to the freezer shelf. Parents banged them until the cubes gave way, while kids laughed and scrambled to pick ice off the floor before it melted. No summer lemonade or Kool-Aid was complete without this little kitchen battle. The trays stuck together, froze to the shelves, and pinched fingers if you were not careful. Yet no one dreamed of buying a fancy new set. They just kept using the same ones until they fell apart. Kids begged to crack the trays, treating it like a game, even when it ended in spilled water. They were cheap, frustrating, and entirely ordinary, part of daily life in poor households across the country. Ice cubes might not have come easy, but they came all the same. Ashtrays on every counter were so common that even non-smokers owned them. Families set them out on coffee tables, kitchen counters, and end tables as casually as they put out salt and pepper. Most were freebies from gas stations or diners, stamped with company logos. Some were glass, some were tin, and others were heavy ceramic, each one telling its own story of where it came from. Children used them as playthings when no one was looking, stacking them or pretending they were miniature dishes. At holiday gatherings, a haze of smoke hovered above every ashtray, blending with the smell of turkey or ham like it was just another seasoning. Guests lit cigarettes without asking, tapping ash into dishes that often outnumbered the family's actual serving bowls. Kids learned to clear them away with the same routine as clearing plates after dinner. Even if no one in the house smoked, an ashtray was there just in case visitors did. The smell of smoke lingered in curtains and cushions, but nobody thought twice about it. Ashtrays were not just household items, they were part of the culture of the time, a symbol of how normal smoking was in everyday life. Crocheted toilet paper covers were one of those decorative touches that felt completely normal in the 1970s but looked downright strange now. They sat proudly on the back of every toilet tank or bathroom shelf, often shaped like dolls or flowers. The idea was simple: hide the roll of toilet paper and make it look fancy. For poor families who could not afford store-bought decorations, crochet was cheap, homemade, and full of personality. Grandmothers spent hours stitching yarn into covers that matched bathroom rugs, towels, or even wallpaper. Some covers were bright and colorful, turning bathrooms into little showcases of homemade craftwork. Others were made with leftover yarn scraps, so the color combinations clashed horribly. But they still did the job. Kids thought it was hilarious to lift the doll's skirt and find a toilet paper roll hidden underneath. Guests always noticed them, sometimes laughing quietly, but nobody thought twice about their practicality. Families believed they were adding elegance to an otherwise plain room. Looking back, they were quirky, impractical, and a little over the top. But in the 1970s, they were just another sign of resourcefulness and homemade charm. Recycled pickle jars as leftover containers were as common as butter tubs. Once the last pickle was fished out and the vinegar poured down the sink, the jar was scrubbed, rinsed, and tucked into the cupboard for a second life. Poor families did not throw away good glass. They turned it into storage for soups, stews, beans, or gravy. Every fridge in the 1970s seemed to have one or two jars stuffed with something mysterious. Kids opened the refrigerator hoping for snacks, only to find jars filled with leftover chili or congealed spaghetti sauce. Sometimes the lids rusted a little around the edges, but families screwed them on anyway. Other times, bits of the old label clung stubbornly to the glass, so you never knew if you were reaching for pickles or beans. They often made clinking noises when stacked on shelves, a sound every kid grew up hearing in their kitchens. Moms reminded kids not to throw them away under any circumstances. Those jars were gold. Even when microwaves became common, people still clung to their jars, reheating soups on the stove instead. The lids always carried a faint pickle smell, no matter how much they were washed, so everything stored inside had a tang of vinegar. Still, nobody cared, because the jars sealed tight and lasted forever. They stacked neatly on shelves and gave poor families a sense of pride. They were saving money and wasting nothing. Today, people might laugh at the idea of reheating stew out of an old pickle jar, but in the 1970s, it was just good sense. Metal folding chairs at the table were the great equalizer of the 1970s. Whenever company came over, they appeared like magic, scraped across the floor and wedged around the dining table. They were never comfortable, always pinching legs or digging into backs, but they made sure everyone had a seat. Poor families relied on them because buying a full set of matching chairs was out of reach. They creaked when you shifted, wobbled if you leaned too far, and left deep scratches in linoleum floors. The metal was always cold when you first sat down, making kids squirm until they warmed up. The thin vinyl padding, when it existed at all, tore quickly and revealed the foam underneath. They rattled noisily every time someone got up for seconds, shaking the whole table. Sometimes they pinched fingers when being folded, leaving kids wary of helping put them away. Yet despite all of this, families treasured them because they allowed everyone a place at the table, no matter how tight the fit. Kids dreaded sitting in them, but visitors were often the unlucky ones assigned to the folding chairs. After dinner, they clattered shut and were stacked against the wall, ready for the next gathering. Families joked about who would get stuck with them, but nobody ever complained too loudly. They were part of the ritual of hosting. Folding chairs meant you were making room for everyone, even if it meant a little discomfort. They symbolized hospitality on a budget, a reminder that love mattered more than luxury. Old shoe boxes for storage were the universal solution to clutter in poor households of the 1970s. Once the sneakers wore out, the box became a treasure chest for something else. Families stacked them in closets filled with receipts, bills, or holiday decorations. Kids used them to store baseball cards, crayons, or small toys, carefully tucking them away under beds. The cardboard wore thin, corners split, and lids never quite fit, but families patched them with tape and kept using them anyway. Some were wrapped in leftover wallpaper or contact paper to make them look fancier. Others had handwritten labels, peeling over time but still legible enough to guide you to Christmas lights or old birthday cards. Shoeboxes sometimes smelled faintly of leather from their original contents, a reminder of long-gone sneakers. Kids loved decorating them with markers, turning them into treasure chests or doll houses. A stack of shoeboxes under the bed felt like a personal library of memories. parents labeled them with a marker or simply remembered which box held what. Sometimes pulling out a shoebox years later was like opening a time capsule, filled with forgotten treasures or family memories. They were not fancy, but they worked, and that was what mattered. Today, people buy expensive organizers, but in the 1970s, poor families knew a shoebox was just as good. Simple, free, and endlessly useful, they were the unsung heroes of household storage. Wooden clothes drying racks were lifesavers on rainy days when the backyard line was useless. Families folded them open in the kitchen or living room, draping socks, shirts, and towels over the slats. The smell of damp fabric filled the house as laundry dried slowly in the stale air. Poor families relied on them to save electricity, even when they owned dryers. The racks wobbled under heavy loads, and kids often knocked them over while running through the house. Sometimes the slats splintered, snagging socks or leaving small cuts on careless hands. Dogs or cats often tried weaving through them, sending clothes tumbling onto the floor. They took up half the kitchen, making it hard to walk. But nobody complained because they saved money. Kids were often told to turn the shirts or flip the socks halfway through drying, learning responsibility along the way. In winter, the sight of steam rising from them near the stove was both practical and oddly comforting. Sheets dragged on the floor and shirts dried stiff as boards, but nobody complained. On winter nights, the drying rack stood by the wood stove, clothes steaming in the rising heat until they were crisp and warm. They may have looked awkward and out of place, but they kept households running on tight budgets. Folding them up and tucking them behind a door became part of the weekly rhythm of life. In the 1970s, wooden drying racks were not optional. They were essential, and everyone knew it. The electric egg poacher was the quiet champion of a better breakfast. Small, unassuming, and often overlooked, it sat tucked away in the corners of countertops, promising soft whites and warm yolks without a pot or pan in sight. You filled the base with water, cracked your eggs into the holders, and watched the steam rise slowly into a gentle cloud. It was perfect for those who wanted elegance without the effort. No vinegar, no swirling water, no chance of a ruined yolk. Just press the button and walk away. In a world full of toasters and coffee makers, it whispered, "Take your time." It belonged to the kind of home that played soft jazz on Sunday mornings and served breakfast on ceramic plates instead of paper towels. The poacher did not need to be flashy. It was consistent. It gave people back their mornings. And yet, it faded. Because poached eggs stopped being everyday meals. Because we forgot how nice it was to feel fancy before 9 in the morning. Now, most sit in thrift shops, unused and unappreciated. But for those who remember, one bite of that perfectly poached egg takes them straight back. When did we decide breakfast was no longer worth slowing down for? Popcorn ceilings were everywhere, and you did not think twice about them until one started flaking into your cereal. Created as an easy solution for soundproofing and hiding imperfections, these textured ceilings were sprayed on like cheap whipped cream, giving homes a bumpy, cratered look that no one questioned until they started falling apart. Vacuuming the ceiling became an actual task in some households, and painting over them was a test of endurance and futility. But the real danger was deeper than dust. Many popcorn ceilings contained asbestos, a now-banned toxic material that can cause serious health issues. Once people found out, the ceiling went from being just ugly to outright terrifying. Suddenly, every flake falling from above felt like a silent threat you could not ignore. That meant removing them was not just inconvenient, it was dangerous and expensive. Families who had lived under them for years were suddenly advised to bring in professionals just to make their homes safe again. Something meant to be invisible became the most threatening part of the room. And the disasters did not stop there. Just take a look under your feet. Before there were curling wands, flat irons, and hair straighteners with 10 settings, there was one holy grail of home beauty, the built-in hairdryer chair. That is right, just like the ones at the salon. These were dome-shaped dryers, fixed right into vanities or dressing tables, and they were everything. Sit down, flip a switch, and suddenly your head was enveloped in a low hum of warm air. These machines were especially popular in the 1950s and 1960s when hairstyles like the beehive or the bouffant required serious volume and serious time. The dryers were sleek, futuristic, and a little noisy, but they got the job done. Housewives would sit under them while flipping through magazines, sipping coffee, or catching up on the neighborhood gossip. Some units were even foldable, tucking away neatly when not in use. Today, we think of beauty appliances as portable and handheld. But back then, hair care was an event, and the home adapted accordingly. These built-in dryer chairs turned the average bathroom into a personal beauty parlor. Sadly, they went the way of Aquanet and home perms. But speaking of gossip, let us head into the hallway because the next stop is where stories were shared, secrets were spilled, and teenage hearts skipped a beat. Behind the smooth cabinet doors of many mid-century kitchens hid a surprising tool, a pull-out dish drainer that lived inside the wall. After washing dishes, you would slide out the rack, load it up, and let everything drip dry behind closed doors. It kept counters clear, made the kitchen look tidy, and gave a sense of order that matched the rest of the house. Some even had small trays underneath to catch the water. It was not about hiding the mess, it was about making space feel peaceful. When plastic racks and countertop drainers became standard, these hidden drying systems quietly disappeared. New kitchens no longer had room for them, and they were hard to clean and prone to mold. But there was something thoughtful about them, something neat, something kind of charming. Now, we just pile dishes in the sink or leave them out for hours. The idea of drying dishes out of sight feels like something from a different era, one where appearances mattered, but so did small comforts. What else have we stopped tucking away for the sake of convenience? The O'Keefe and Merritt Aristocrat range was not just a stove, it was a throne. Towering over every other appliance in the room, this 734-pound marvel was the ultimate status symbol in post-war kitchens. It did not whisper innovation, it shouted it. With twin ovens, broilers, warming drawers, and a built-in timer clock, it looked like something from a science fiction movie, only real. Housewives of the 1940s and 1950s dreamed of owning one. Advertisements called it the Cadillac of kitchen ranges, and they were not exaggerating. You could roast a turkey, bake a pie, broil steaks, and warm dinner rolls at the same time. It was massive, yes, but that size came with function. Wide enamel cooktops offered space for every pot and pan. The dials were thick, confident, and satisfying to turn. It felt like driving a classic car, slow, powerful, and designed to last forever. But time moves fast, kitchens shrank, stainless steel arrived, and the Aristocrat, once a dream, became too heavy, too large, too old-fashioned. Most were discarded during remodels, sold for scrap or left in garages like relics from a forgotten empire. But ask anyone who grew up with one, and they will tell you that stove made cooking feel like a ceremony. When did we decide that smaller meant better? If you lived through the 1970s, you remember the feel of it between your toes. Shag carpeting was more than a design choice, it was a movement. Bold colors, thick fibers, and the kind of plush softness that made you want to lie down and never get up. From mustard yellows to burnt oranges, it blanketed floors in every room, including bathrooms, which is an idea no one has really been able to explain. Shag was fun and funky, but it was also a magnet for everything you never wanted in your house. Dust, dirt, pet hair, smells, and once it was in there, it stayed. Vacuuming was a chore. Deep cleaning was a nightmare. The very feature that made shag carpet so appealing, its thick, luxurious texture, was exactly what made it impossible to clean. People were not just pulling it up for new trends, they were trying to reclaim their air quality. What started as a symbol of comfort quickly became a maintenance disaster. Eventually, people tore it up in favor of cleaner, sleeker options. Shag rugs might have made a small comeback, but the wall-to-wall version? It is staying in the past, where it belongs. Of course, nothing trapped dust or the mood of a dark, cramped house quite like what was hanging on the walls. Walk into an old house and open a closet door, and you might get hit with a smell that is oddly comforting. Woody, warm, a little spicy. That would be cedar, not a scent diffuser, not a spray. Actual cedar wood, lined across the walls of the closet from top to bottom. These cedar-lined closets were the silent guardians of America's wardrobes. They protected against moths, mildew, and musty smells. But they also added a kind of rustic luxury, like storing your clothes inside a tree trunk at a high-end cabin. The idea was simple. Cedar wood naturally repels insects, so why not turn your entire closet into a bug-proof haven? People did not just store coats in there, they kept heirlooms, wool suits, and seasonal clothes safe year-round. Some closets were fully lined, others just had a single cedar panel on one wall. Either way, it gave the whole room a spa vibe long before that was a thing. These days, you might see cedar blocks or hangers sold in stores, but entire closets made of the stuff? That has faded into the woodwork, literally. The world got synthetic, and the cedar charm became a relic. But if you think that was clever, wait until you see how people used to pass food across rooms without ever leaving their chair. It is hard to explain to someone today why there would be an ironing board in the kitchen. But for generations of American homemakers, ironing while cooking made perfect sense. You could press shirts while pasta boiled. The ironing board lived behind a narrow cabinet door, usually next to the fridge or near a pantry wall. You would open the latch, fold it down, and start ironing right there on the linoleum. It made the kitchen feel like a command center. Meals, laundry, homework, all happening at once. Some were even wired with built-in sockets, so you could plug in your iron without running cords across the room. There was something deeply efficient and strangely comforting about handling both dinner and dress shirts in the same breath. It made the kitchen feel like the heart of everything, not just the place where food was made. It sounds absurd now, but back then it was the ultimate multitasker's dream. Eventually, fashion changed, and so did fabrics. Permanent press clothing came along, and ironing became less of a daily ritual. Builders stopped including these wall units, and the ones that remained often jammed or collected dust. Today, a recessed ironing board in the kitchen wall feels like something out of a time capsule. You can still see the outline on painted-over cabinet doors in old houses. But no one's waiting on the kettle while smoothing out their slacks anymore. What else have we quietly stopped doing? The hand-crank food mill was a quiet champion in kitchens before electric blenders buzzed their way into dominance. With its simple design, a bowl, a blade, a hand crank, and a strainer, it turned soft vegetables and fruits into smooth purees with nothing but elbow grease. It did not need a plug. It just needed patience. You would place tomatoes, apples, or potatoes inside, then turn the handle slowly. Seeds, skins, and lumps were separated out, leaving a velvety mash that tasted more honest than anything a blade spinning at 10,000 rotations per minute could produce. It was ideal for baby food, applesauce, mashed potatoes, and tomato paste. And when you used it, you were not just cooking, you were tending. You were shaping food into its gentlest form. You felt connected to the process. And maybe, just maybe, the food tasted better because you worked for it. As technology took over, the hand-crank mill faded into storage, its quiet rhythm replaced by roaring motors and flashing lights. But in some kitchens, it still lives, reliable, low-tech, and full of dignity. It is not fast, it is not sleek, but it reminds us that sometimes food is better when made slowly, one turn at a time. The promise of modular furniture was simple: flexibility, creativity, and smart design for small spaces. What we got instead was a collection of flimsy particle board pieces that wobbled with every move. These were the stackable shelves, folding tables, and interchangeable couch systems that dominated catalogs in the 1970s. And on paper, they made sense. Custom configurations, easy to rearrange, and light enough to move around by yourself. But there was a reason they were light. They were also fragile. The locking mechanisms broke, the cheap finishes peeled, and what looked cool in the store rarely held up under the daily wear of real life. Coffee tables would sag in the middle, bookshelves leaned like tired soldiers, Even the stylish-looking modular couches were uncomfortable and awkward to clean. Some homeowners embraced the idea at first, charmed by the sense of innovation. But over time, the frustration set in. The dream of flexible living turned into a house full of disposable furniture. And if the modular design failed to impress, the next status symbol at least came with its own built-in glamour, until nobody wanted it anymore. It looked like a cabinet, just a little rectangle in the wall with a tiny knob. But open it up and suddenly you had an ironing board swinging down like a Murphy bed for your clothes. Fold-out ironing boards in the wall were the peak of space-saving genius. These things were especially popular in mid-century homes, when every inch of space had to count. The board folded out flat, usually right next to the laundry area or inside the kitchen pantry. You did not have to drag a heavy metal contraption from the closet. Just pop it open, plug in the iron, and get to work. Some even had a tiny shelf or built-in plug to hold the iron itself, along with a little light above the board. Now that was fancy. Housewives adored these because they made chores quicker. And let's face it, they just looked slick. Like the house was in on the secret with you. Eventually, though, as trends moved toward larger laundry rooms and portable everything, these ironing stations disappeared. But for the folks who grew up with one, there is a real nostalgia there. It was like opening a secret door into domestic life. Now, speaking of secret doors, the next one was not about cleaning your shirt. It was about making sure your closet smelled like the forest. Warming drawers used to be the quiet hero of the kitchen, especially when dinner was not ready all at once. Tucked just below the oven, this thin, shallow drawer kept plates warm so that food would not go cold before it reached the table. You would set it to low, slide in your dishes, and when the roast came out, everything was ready to serve piping hot. This feature was a nod to formality. Meals meant something, and every detail mattered. Back then, no one wanted to pile roast beef onto a cold plate. But as life sped up and microwaves took over, warming drawers started disappearing. They took up space. They were easy to forget about. And soon, they felt like a relic of a more elegant time. Builders stopped including them in standard models, and even higher-end kitchens started to phase them out. Now, if you see one, it is usually mistaken for a storage drawer. But once, it meant warmth, literally and figuratively. It meant taking care, not just serving food. When did we stop setting the table like it was worth it? The bread box was once as essential to the kitchen as the sink or the stove. A humble wooden or metal container, usually perched at the back of the counter, it kept loaves fresh in the days before plastic bags and preservatives took over. Its job was simple: slow down staleness and keep out pests. But its presence meant more than that. It meant you baked or bought bread regularly, that someone in the house cared about toast, sandwiches, or buttered slices to go with stew. Opening the lid released the faintest scent of yeast and crust. For kids, it was the treasure chest of after-school snacks. For adults, it was a silent reminder that home meant warmth. The sound of the lid closing, soft, final, was part of the rhythm of daily life. Bread boxes came in colors to match tiled kitchens and Formica counters. They had floral decals, chrome handles, and rounded corners that looked almost cheerful. Over time, though, as preservatives lengthened shelf lives and bread became an afterthought, the box disappeared. Modern kitchens left no room for something so quaint. But in losing it, we lost a ritual. A quiet pause in the day. When did bread stop deserving a place of its own? Pea gravel patios looked charming in home improvement magazines. Rustic, effortless, a little slice of the French countryside dropped into a suburban backyard. But once they were installed, the reality quickly set in. These patios were nothing more than a layer of loose, sharp-edged stones that never stayed in place. Chairs sank into them, tables wobbled, and walking barefoot was out of the question unless you had calluses like leather. Every breeze sent pebbles scattering into the grass, and lawnmowers did not take kindly to rogue gravel. Kids hated playing on it, pets tracked it indoors, and any kind of sweeping or raking turned into a full-blown yard battle. Even worse, the so-called drainage benefits rarely worked out, leaving the area soggy in winter and scorched in summer. Within a year, most patios looked patchy and uneven, like a poorly maintained construction site rather than a space for relaxation. Homeowners tried tamping the gravel down, adding edging, even gluing it in place, but nothing made it better. It was a great idea in theory, undone by the simplest problem: gravel rolls and people fall. Still, even inside the house, that same mix of fashion and frustration kept showing up, especially in the form of a curtain that was not quite a wall and not quite anything useful at all. We need to talk about the elephant, or maybe the shag, in the room. Carpeted bathrooms. Yes, wall-to-wall carpeting in the bathroom. Someone, somewhere, decided that stepping out of the shower onto tile was just too cold. So instead, they gave us plush floors that soaked up everything. These bathroom carpets matched the walls, the sink, the curtains. You had mint green bathrooms with mint green rugs from tub to toilet, pink bathrooms with matching fuzzy toilet seat covers and floor mats. It was peak comfort meets catastrophe. Over time, those comfy carpets turned into breeding grounds for mold, mildew, and mystery smells. Still, you have to give it credit for ambition. For a few decades, the bathroom was not just a place to get clean, it was a fully furnished retreat. These days, waterproof vinyl and ceramic tiles have reclaimed their throne. But every now and then, you stumble upon an old house with a powder blue plush floor and wonder what it was like to live so fearlessly. Now, if that made you raise an eyebrow, wait until you hear about the toilet paper holders. That could sing. Tile countertops used to be the envy of every stylish post-war kitchen. Bright turquoise, sunny yellow, or soft pink ceramic tiles lined the counters like a checkerboard of domestic optimism. But the secret every home cook knew was this: those grout lines were a menace. They absorbed spills, caught crumbs, and stained faster than you could scrub. You might as well have been cooking on a tiled floor. Still, people loved the look. It felt cheerful, polished, and clean, at least at first glance. The tiles were cool to the touch and easy to replace if one chipped. You wiped them down after every meal, but somehow they still told the story of every spill and every stir. Those stains were not just grime, they were memories set in stone. But no matter how often you scrubbed with baking soda and vinegar, the grout lines always seemed a shade darker than the day before. Eventually, the shine wore off. Laminate, granite, and seamless solid surfaces took over. You could wipe once and be done. No more grout brushes, no more bleach, but something about those tile counters still lingers in the memory. They were imperfect, yes, but also warm and lived in. Kitchens where birthday cakes were frosted and Sunday gravy simmered for hours. When did spotless surfaces become more important than stories? The Cold Spot refrigerator was not just an appliance. It was the promise of a modern American life, humming quietly behind a steel door. Born in 1928 and sold by Sears for nearly 50 years, it was as dependable as it was beautiful. But in 1935, the Cold Spot became something extraordinary. That year, legendary designer Raymond Loewy transformed it into a sleek, curved monument to the future. Gone were the clunky bolts and exposed hinges. In their place, smooth lines, minimal handles, and a shape that looked more like a Cadillac fender than a food locker. It was the first refrigerator to look good in the spotlight, not just behind the scenes. Inside, it had adjustable shelves, crisper drawers, and butter compartments, all luxuries at the time. It was quiet, reliable, and built to last for decades. Families placed cherished leftovers in its embrace. Birthday cakes, cold fried chicken, pitchers of lemonade. This was where comfort lived. And yet, the Cold Spot's legacy faded as mass manufacturing favored cheaper materials and disposable models. The beauty disappeared. The silence was replaced with buzz and blinking lights, and the promise of forever was swapped for one-year warranties. When did we decide that cold convenience was more important than warm design? Built-in intercom systems were supposed to be the future. Press a button in the kitchen, and you could talk to someone 2 rooms away. No yelling, no walking upstairs, just crystal clear communication across your house. Except, not really. These systems were clunky, ugly, and often broken. The audio quality was closer to a drive-through speaker than anything futuristic. Static, echoes, and random bursts of feedback became the norm, and when they did work, it often felt like you were eavesdropping more than talking. Even as a novelty, the intercom felt outdated within a few years, replaced by cordless phones and then home cell lines. What was once cutting edge quickly became awkward background noise. People quickly realized that a cordless phone, or just walking down the hall, was faster and less frustrating. Within a decade, these systems went from high-end status symbols to forgotten wall boxes gathering dust. Some were hidden behind art, others were ripped out entirely. But if avocado green had a twin in tragedy, it was coming next. A color so bold, so sunny, and so divisive that it burned itself into America's kitchen memory forever. Speaking of things built right into the house, you are not going to believe what kind of doors were hiding inside the walls. For your milk. Picture this. You wake up, walk to the side of your kitchen, and open a tiny little door built right into your house. Behind it, a bottle of fresh milk, cool and ready to pour, maybe even some butter or cream depending on the day. No, it is not magic. That was the milk door, also called a milk chute. These small pass-through compartments were genius in their simplicity. One side opened from the outside, where the milkman would quietly place the day's delivery. The other opened from inside the house, so you never had to go out in your slippers or bathrobe. It was the drive-through window before there were drive-thrus. These doors were more than convenient. They were a sign that the world once ran on a shared rhythm. Everyone knew when the milkman came by. You could even leave payments or notes inside. Some had little shelves, others had insulation. And most people never locked them, because who would steal milk? Of course, once grocery stores and home refrigeration became widespread, the milk door quietly disappeared, sealed up, painted over, or just forgotten. But somewhere out there, behind layers of drywall, a few still exist. Hidden time capsules. Screwed directly into the wall, these heavy-duty wall-mounted can openers were as stubborn as they were convenient. Usually found right next to the stove or sink, they were the type of kitchen gadget you used without thinking, until you bumped your head into one or sliced your finger trying to clean it. You locked in the can, turned the large handle, and heard that satisfying scrape as the lid peeled away. And it never moved. That was the point. It was always there, ready to go. Back then, cans did not have pop-tops, and handheld openers were prone to rust or breaking. So this chunky mechanical beast became part of the kitchen wall like a light switch. It made even the smallest task feel intentional, like you were part of a well-oiled machine. And it never broke, because it was made to be used, not replaced. Some people even bragged about how fast they could open a can of tomato soup. But as kitchens modernized and designers chose clean lines over utility, wall-mounted can openers became kitchen fossils. They were ripped out and tossed away, their holes patched up and painted over. Now, most folks do not even recognize them. But if you ever find one, run your hand along the gear teeth. It might just stir something in you. Why did we stop building things to stay put? The butter mold was once a quiet symbol of pride that lived in farmhouse kitchens and rural homes across the country. Before butter came in sticks wrapped in wax paper and stacked in supermarket coolers, it was made by hand, from cream churned for what felt like hours. But churning was only half the ritual. The real finish came when that butter, thick, golden, and soft, was pressed into a hand-carved wooden mold. These molds came in all shapes and designs: roses, wheat stalks, stars, initials. Some were simple, some were intricate, but all of them said the same thing. This was made with care. They were not just decorative, they were a mark of identity. In local markets and community fairs, families were recognized by their unique butter stamps. It was not branding, it was heritage, a kind of craftsmanship that was passed down like a recipe. Butter molds were rinsed, dried, and stored in the coolest cupboard. They were cleaned with a toothbrush, handled like treasure. Today, you will find them dusty on antique shelves, mistaken for cookie presses or quaint kitchen decor. But they were never just for show. They were the final touch to a process that took time, patience, and love. When did we stop honoring the beauty in what we used to make by hand? If these thrifty 1970s household memories brought a smile, share your own forgotten item in the comments. Give this video a like to keep the stories alive, and subscribe so you never miss another trip back to the resourceful past.